Welcome, everybody. Nice to see everyone. Well, I mean, you can see me, I can't see all of you, but hopefully everyone's having a great summer. We have Cindi Lockhart back with us to talk today about constipation. Bum, bum, bum. It's a very heavy topic. My inner first grader is going to be coming out this entire time and wanting to make jokes, but it's really not a funny thing. Like this is so when people think about constipation, they think about the occasional thing that happens to all of us, but there are people who really suffer with this. And so Cindi, who is our functional nutritionist here at Vital Health, Cindi has many years experience as a nutritionist, functionally medicine trained, just a really extraordinary clinician on like all levels. Adds so much to our patients' care and helping all of us understand more about the role of food, supplements, even a lot of the other functional medicine stuff that those of us who are practicing as docs do. And we are so excited to have you talk with us today, Cindi, about the gut and constipation, because I know this is a really great area for you. Like you're really good at this.
So important because especially as a nutritionist, and that's where I think we as a population are becoming a little bit kinder to this topic, whereas
Yes.
before it was taboo, like we couldn't talk about that.
Right. Yes.
I tell people, like as a nutritionist, it's just as important to know what's going into your body as what's coming out of your body, because it's
Absolutely.
telling us the story. Like, are we using what's going in properly?
Yes. And most of us don't want to pay attention to those things, but it is really important. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was alluding to constipation is, something that we all have experienced at one point or another in our lives, but for some people it is an ongoing struggle. And I can speak for my own patients that struggle with chronic constipation or just, constipation here and there. It's really hard for people. Like it's uncomfortable. It just is really, sometimes it can be a really hard problem to solve. So we wanted to sort of take this problem apart and break it down and assimilate, do the whole digestive thing. And I was going to say get to the bottom of it, but
The puns are perfect. Let's go.
I got to stop. Okay. So,
Hey, wait, quick question.
yeah,
Do you see where it says Cindi Lockhart is signed in on my video? Like,
mm,
does it say it on my screen?
doesn't say anything on my screen, but it should.
You don't see it on mine? Because there's just like this
No,
block. So I just want to make sure you're not seeing it on your
no,
side. That's
no,
supposed
I
to be
don't
more
see it. I
annoying.
just see your lovely abode and lovely you, and that's it.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted, sorry.
Yeah,
Well, and
no,
okay.
that would be very distracting otherwise. I get it. Okay, so let's level set
Okay.
and let's talk about what is constipation exactly. Like when we talk about constipation, what does it mean? Let's
I
start.
think that is super important. Like,
Yeah.
that is the question I ask every single one of my clients.
Mhm.
And it's misconceived. Because I even remember growing up as a kid, I was constipated and I was only going to the bathroom a couple times a week. And the doctor was like, oh, if that's normal for you, that's normal. What
Wow.
we know now is that's not normal. So we should be having at least one bowel movement a day, if not two to three. And
Mhm.
it should be easy to
Yeah.
pass. So we
Yeah.
shouldn't have to be sitting there straining for 15, 20 minutes. And this is where we got to look, right? It should be brown. It should be like a little snake-like form that is sunk, not floating.
Mhm.
And we should feel good afterwards. Like we got everything out.
Right. Right.
That's really the epitome of what elimination is. So
Yes.
constipation would be going to the bathroom, number two, less than once a day, having to strain, having little hard pellets.
Mhm.
I often call it like rabbit poop,
Yep.
and then just never feeling like we're getting it all out.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think most people who have that problem readily relate and go, like, yep, that's me. That's pretty much how it is most of the time, right?
So the other thing too is that I think some people feel like, well, that's normal for me. I
Yeah.
don't go every day, and that's normal. That's okay.
Mm.
But I always like tell people, well, think about that, because what poop is it's removing the waste
Right.
from our body, what we don't need or want in our body. So if we're not getting it out, guess where it's going?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah,
So
it
we
is
do
amazing.
need to get out.
Yeah, major detoxification pathway, right? I mean, we detoxify that way. And the other thing we think about is as we're, sort of concentrating everything in the colon for the process of elimination, we are concentrating everything. So everything that we're trying to release into the stool that's coming into contact with the colon, the longer it sits there, the harder it is, on that gut lining that is, trying to be a barrier between us and what is in our guts. So yeah, for sure. And I would just add like a couple of things, and these are probably really obvious to most people, but since you mentioned color, we can have varied color to our stool, obviously, depending on what we've eaten. Sometimes things come out looking a lot like what we ate, right? That's not terribly uncommon, depending on how quickly your gut moves. But some of the things that we'd want to really keep an eye out is obviously we never want to see blood in our stool. And we never want to see a stool that looks very black or consistently looks very black, because that can indicate old blood
Right.
that's sort of, partially broken down.
Unless they're taking iron.
Unless
So
you're taking iron, or
yeah,
sometimes
iron.
Pepto-Bismol. Yep. Those can definitely do that. And then, the floating piece I think is important. You mentioned, talk a little bit about that. Like, what does it mean if the stool floats in the toilet?
So I always, the story that I use, I like to use stories, I like to use analogies because I think it's easy for us to remember that way, is I always think about kids at the swimming pool. Like which kid is going to float on top and which is going to sink to the bottom?
Right.
Your lean kid is going to sink. Your chubby kid is going to float. So what
Right.
that's telling us is that we're not digesting and absorbing fat very well. So that means from our diet, but that can also mean like vitamin D is super important
Yeah.
for so many different health reasons. So that can even include our fat soluble vitamins. We're not going to be absorbing as well if it's showing up in our toilet as floating poop.
Completely, yes. All those fat soluble vitamins, all of the things that we make out of fat, like hormones, and people can become quite depleted if they're just getting rid of all their fat in their, or most of their fat in their stool, and not absorbing it into their bodies. Um, yeah, that is actually a really important indicator, and we can actually test for that. When we do digestive analysis, we can actually quantify how much fat, different types of fat, and even protein is in the stool, and that really helps us with understanding digestion, top of the digestive tract, and what's happening with digestive enzymes and all that kind of stuff. So,
Such an
yeah,
important test.
totally. So let's talk a little bit about what are some of the common reasons why people get constipated?
I would say as a nutritionist, the top two that I see are lack of fiber and lack of water.
Yeah. Oh, I was just drinking some water. That's good. Well timed.
So that's the first place I go with folks that are not having regular bowel movements. Is I'm looking at their diet, and what I tend to see is a lot of refined carbohydrates and starches. A lot of your chips and your cereals and your breads and your pastas. There's not many fruits or vegetables. There's not many whole grains, which is just one ingredient. There's not much beans or legumes, and then their water is really low.
Mhm.
And so that, we need the fiber to help bulk the stool, and we need the water to soften it. So if
Yep.
you increase your fiber without water, that's not going to be fun. That's going to be really uncomfortable. You're going to feel really
Yes.
gassy and bloated. So you do need both. You do
Yep.
need to increase water and increase fiber through whole foods. So whole foods, foods that don't have labels, or if there is a label, it's a very short ingredient list that you can identify everything in it.
Right. All the things that are listed, and you're not trying to look them up on Wikipedia or something.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
so when you're looking at fiber, and we always talk about fiber. So this is a big topic, and I think it's one that people don't really understand. I profess that I am no expert in this topic either, nor am I probably good at getting in the amount of fiber I'm supposed to get in every day. I try, I really do, but it's not easy. So the two types of fiber, soluble and insoluble.
Mhm.
Can you talk us through a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So soluble fiber does just that. It dissolves in water. It dissolves in our body's tissues, or fluids, I should say.
Mhm.
So it actually causes a gel-like material that passes through the GI tract, and it can grab onto things like cholesterol and keep our blood sugar regulated, keep our cholesterol levels regulated. Whereas insoluble fiber does not dissolve in water or our body's fluids. It helps to absorb fluid. into the stool. So bulking it up, softening it so that's easier to pass. So that's also healthier for the colon and the rectum, because it's getting rid of that waste, and it's helping to preserve, as you mentioned, that intestinal barrier and the health of the tissue that's in those areas. And way back when, in ancestry, if we go way back in history, they were eating 100 grams of fiber a day. Guess what we are eating today as Americans?
Like, not that for sure.
Like less than 1 in 10 of us are getting the proper amount. Like we're eating 11 to 15 grams if we're lucky.
So
and that's again because of the processing of our foods that really
okay.
with the industrialization. So when we started making processed foods, they were more convenient, they were easier, they were tastier, and we forgot about whole foods.
So that's how the cave people did it. They just didn't have all the processed stuff.
Oh, yeah. They didn't have crackers and chips and Snapwells and Doritos and all that fun stuff.
Wow. Okay. So talk about, what is the requirement for men and women for fiber, or like not requirement, what is recommended? Like, what should people be striving for fiber?
The Institute of Medicine really recommends 25 grams for women, 38 for men. So I tend to go somewhere between 25 and 30 for most women, and 30 to 40 for men, depending on where they are, what their health needs are, and what their function is. But again, if you go back to whole foods, so you really focus on bulking up, no pun intended there, your fresh vegetables, your fresh fruits, beans and legumes.
Yes.
Nuts and seeds, whole grains like oats or millet or amaranth or quinoa or rice, that is going to help bring the fiber in easily. Avocados are another great source. Your seeds like flax and chia, so if we just intentionally and purposefully start adding those things in, the digestive system is going to be so much happier.
That's so true. So do you try to get like equal amounts of soluble and insoluble, or does it not? I mean, as long as you're getting some of both, does it really matter? Is it like, do they have to be 50-50, or is there some magical ratio of the two? No.
There is no magical ratio. I think it would depend on what somebody needs health-wise. So if we think cardiometabolic, if somebody has higher blood sugars, higher cholesterol levels, blood pressure, we might be wanting to hone in a little more on the soluble side. Whereas if it's more of a GI or colorectal, like diverticulitis or colon cancer or any type of colorectal issue, we're going to look more at the insoluble side, or constipation, the main topic of today.
Yeah. So that's more insoluble fiber would be more helpful in that case.
Correct.
They're both important.
Both very important for general health and digestive health.
So how do you tell people, how do you help people find out how much fiber is in their diet? Like, how do you track that? How do you help them at least figure out how much they're getting?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So personally, I look to see what somebody's eating currently. Like, what are their nutritional habits? What are they eating in a general day? And we might just first start on getting back to whole foods. So start with building that foundation first. And then I probably would use it. I don't like to use it often because it's a lot of work. But if you used a Lose It app, or you use the MyFitnessPal app, just to track a couple days, let's get a feel for where you're at. That's going to give us a better gauge. Some people, you could look up every food, so you might have to do a little more work on measuring your foods, tracking it online on one of the apps. And that way we know where you're at. So we can say, yep, you're right in that really healthy range.
But you can look it up too. You could say, like, track what you're writing down, what you're eating, or putting it in an app, but then sort of getting a general idea of, where you land when the day's done and you're like, okay, I ate these foods and this is approximately how much fiber I got in.
Yeah, and I would encourage measuring at that point. So you'd want to measure foods to be able to track properly. But yeah, you could absolutely do that. Just jot it down on paper and then go online to see how much fiber is in half a cup of quinoa.
And then once you have it, you kind of have it, right? Like, you kind of know gut level that you kind of understand how much fiber, or what the foods are that you got to eat on a regular basis in order to be able to meet that need.
Yep. What's contributing to that? And then we're not gonna be perfect every single day.
Right.
So it's just getting a feel as general habits.
Yeah, that's true.
That's why I
Or
like
most days, right?
people, huh?
Most days. Like if you can try for most days.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I know the topic is constipation, but to your point, there's so many other medical problems that are impacted by fiber and, metabolic ones like diabetes or prediabetes, obesity, high cholesterol, high triglycerides, um, fluctuating blood sugars, insulin resistance, all of that whole package. Fiber is really a critically important part of managing those problems. We don't tend to think about that. We tend to think about like, what we're eating in terms of carbohydrate and avoiding sugar and all those kind of things. But fiber is really key to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I mean, our bacteria, we haven't really talked about the bacteria that's in our colon, but that's very metabolically active. And so
Right.
you have to feed them. And that's often called prebiotics. And so that's coming from what? Fibrous whole foods.
It's true. Yes. The microbiome food. Yes. They
Yes.
don't work for
Our
us unless we
fertilizer.
feed them.
Yes, they
Sort of like
do.
our kids.
Yeah, you got to feed them to let them grow.
So let's switch topics a little bit. There's another gut condition that is highly related to constipation, and that is SIBO, small
Mhm.
intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Um, Really common problem, something that we see in functional medicine all the time. And there's a lot of connection with constipation in that condition. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there, as you mentioned, there's different types of SIBO. So SIBO is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So when we think about our bacteria, the majority of it is in our colon or
Yeah.
our large intestine. So when
Yes.
we think about the small intestine in comparison, it should be relatively sterile.
Yeah.
But when we have overgrowth, that can create issues. And so there's two different, well, there's three, but there's two primary gases that are produced by these bacteria that are overgrowing in the small intestine, methane and hydrogen. And methane is the one that is correlated more with that slower motility or constipation. So I mean, it's actually been shown that, and so again, like if we have any type of digestive disruption, especially along the case of elimination, what are we often diagnosed with? IBS,
Bowel, right. Irritable bowel
irritable bowel.
syndrome.
So it's kind of like a functional bowel condition. And
Yes.
up to 80% of that is actually SIBO.
Right.
So really good that you bring that up. So it's
Mhm.
just really showing that we are not emptying food and waste as effectively and quickly as we could and should be from the small intestine into the large intestine. So we start to feed the bacteria that are in the small intestine, and then what is in the back of the large intestine starts to back up into the small intestine. So we
Yes.
really just got to help that motility to
Mhm.
keep things flowing, keep things doing what it's supposed to do
Yeah.
through the GI.
Yeah. Motility is so key. And I think I probably about a year ago, I learned this concept. I always thought about SIBO as something that was introduced from above. Like it was more of like, oh, low stomach acid and bacteria can get through and then it populates the small intestine. But what we're learning, or at least I've learned in the last year, especially with methane producing SIBO or intestinal methanogen or overgrowth, is that it is really that back and forward or backwards process
Just back
where
up.
the stool is being refluxed back into the bottom of the small intestine, not the top, the bottom of it, that really plants the seeds for SIBO.
Yeah.
And lots of discomfort, a lot, and it sort of feeds itself then. It becomes more, the more this problem goes on, the less motility one has, the less motility one has, the more the bacteria can overgrow, and it just sort of becomes a self-perpetuating thing. And so, the patient will go to the doctor and say, I have gas, I have a stomach ache, I, feel black.
Bloated.
And yes, then the label gets put on the person: irritable bowel syndrome, constipation, IBS-C, and then all the constipation remedies are thrown at the person without really looking at like, well, wait, what's going on underneath it? Yeah, exactly. Yes. So yeah, SIBO, emo. Um, the third one is hydrogen sulfide, right?
Yeah. The
Hydrogen
third
sulfide
one is,
overgrowth.
mhm. And you can have a mix of the two. And
Hmm.
so
Yes.
it's really interesting how they all present. Everybody is different.
Mhm.
But I think, especially with the methane, a lot of
Yeah.
people are super bloated, like
Yes.
they feel pregnant bloated.
Yes.
That's a common scenario that I hear a lot from, especially my women who are
Yeah.
dealing.
Have them unbutton their pants after they eat. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is something that we can test. We do a breath test. We can identify which type it is or which types it is, and treat accordingly. But I think the underlying point here is motility, motility, motility. This is so key because you can treat it. If you don't address the motility, it's going to come right back.
Yes, it's one of those persistent things that exactly you're never going to be able to completely get rid of unless you address one of the root causes, and that's that motility. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah. So the couple of things that we use when we're addressing the motility, especially for the methanogen overgrowth or the EMO version, the SIBO, intestinal methanogen overgrowth, is we use some additional, supplements like neem and allicin, which is like a garlic extract, sometimes berberine. We sometimes even use low dose naltrexone, um, LDN, which can
Yeah.
be interesting. It actually helps with motility in the case of SIBO. So sometimes we use that.
What
What?
about, I know, yeah, there's other like supplements that are more like ginger and some
Yeah,
other supplements too, just to help with that, like motility activators. What about like one of our other practitioners uses low dose erythromycin
yeah, that has been used
as a
as well.
motility activator? Yeah,
Yes, right. It's
yeah,
fascinating. It's
it
fascinating.
is. There's a lot. We're learning so much.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating to me too is Mark Pimenthal, who's one of the leading researchers and out in Los Angeles at Cedars-Sinai in SIBO. Um, One of the things that we always pointed the finger at when we were talking about SIBO is the use of proton pump inhibitors, PPI medications, that are now widely available over the counter, like Nexium and Prilosec and Prevacid, and people take them a lot. And we used to think that they really inhibit, obviously, acid production in the stomach, allow bacteria to pass through, and can potentially be a setup for SIBO. And surprisingly, what I heard him talk about was the fact that these PPIs actually enhance the motion of the waves of what we call peristalsis in the gut, this forward motion, these waves that happen behind the scenes in the small intestine with the little finger projectile, in the small intestine that are part of our absorption, that it actually can be sometimes helpful for some people, which I thought was a real head scratcher. Not that I'm telling people to go out and take proton pump inhibitors. Please do not do that. But it's just interesting that we have to constantly be asking the questions of, like, what is the underlying cause? What are things that really help and what are things that don't really help? And expand our awareness and understanding about these really common conditions.
Yeah, and I think it's like it's just kind of pulling away those layers, right? Trying to get to
Yeah.
the root of like when did this start happening? What was going on in life and what works, So I mean everybody's gonna respond a little bit differently too. So I think
Yes.
that's that personalization that we offer our
Right.
clients is, let's hone in on what's best for you. But that is interesting. I don't think I've ever heard that.
I know. I was kind of a little bit like, really, do we want to be talking about it? Like, it sounds like a raw
Yeah,
thing to talk about, but it is what it is. And again, I'm not a
I,
proponent. I think his point was like more research is needed, but we may have gotten this all wrong, or maybe we're not exactly thinking about this the right way. We're kind of jumping to something that could potentially be the case, but it's not always the case for everyone. A lot of other hazards associated with PPIs, obviously.
exactly. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. So when you and I do our gut testing, or when our functional medicine docs do gut testing, we're looking at digestive health really from top to bottom. And
Yep.
I kind of want to talk through some of the things that may be happening as we march through the gut from the very top part of the gut with chewing and salivary enzymes and the way that we're digesting at the very beginning, kind of all the way through it, and then maybe end up talking a little bit more about the microbiome, which is so important. So let's talk about like some of the things that when you talk to somebody who's having gut health issues, constipation, what are you thinking about from an upper GI standpoint that may be contributing to their constipation?
Upper GI, you
Yeah.
mentioned it. The two are going to be chewing and then stomach acid.
Yeah.
So it's like, how fast are you eating? Are you
Yes.
chewing until the food is liquid before you swallow?
Yep.
And none of us are doing that. We're always on the run, doing other things. We're multitasking, eating in between, and we don't even know what we're eating. And
Yes.
that is so important because it's going to actually start the digestive process.
Mhm.
And I mean, and I always encourage people, like I'll do a mindful eating practice challenge with my clients. So kind
Hmm.
of take them through the certain approach that I like to use and say, let's just try it.
Yeah.
And when they do that, they're like, oh my gosh, I fill up quicker. I enjoy my food better. My stomach is not bloated and uncomfortable. I'm actually moving my bowels more just by how you eat. So we really got to think about the pace of our eating. What are we doing during our meal? It should be in a calm environment with sitting versus standing and running around, and also no tech distractions, because you want to really focus on your food. Even taking a couple deep breaths before you start eating. So that's one. And then stomach acid, a lot of us think, to your point with the proton pump inhibitors, we think we have too much acid if we have indigestion or maybe some other type of symptom, but oftentimes it's the reverse. We
Yeah.
have low stomach acid.
Hmm.
So to your point, the low stomach acid can allow some of those pathogens like bacteria to pass through and go into the lower intestinal tract and create problems like
Right.
sebum. Or, we've got certain nutrients like B12 and iron and iodine and selenium and our minerals that keep our bones strong that need
Right.
an acidic environment.
Yeah.
And that also helps to initiate the digestion of proteins in our food. So, those two things on the upper half are really important. And I think even with like low stomach acid, how do we know? It could be heartburn, right? So heartburn could be too much acid, but more often than not, it's low acid.
Yeah.
You could feel constipated, or maybe you have really loose stools. You can feel very bloated. You feel really full after eating, even though you didn't eat a lot. You feel
Right.
super full. You're belching after you eat. The gas, you might see some undigested food in the stool. So there's some symptoms that we don't necessarily think are related to what might be happening in that upper GI tract.
Yeah, that's so true that the acidification piece, I mean, it sort of sets the whole pace, right? I mean, if the food in the stomach is not acidic enough when it enters the small intestine, it doesn't enter the small intestine, like it just doesn't move forward. We
Yeah,
think of the GI tract as just this tube, but it's really, there's so many things going on, and particularly with pH. So whether something is acid or not, at the
yeah,
very, very top of the digestive process makes the whole thing work better or worse, right?
totally.
So how do you address low stomach acid? What do you do about that?
So there are digestive enzymes that have
Mhm.
betaine hydrochloric acid in it. So might use that. That's usually my first go-to. Some people, like to do something a little gentler, like apple cider vinegar, you know,
Mhm.
before they eat. And if it works for them, then that's fine too. But I tend to, I think a lot of us do need support on the digestive front.
Yep.
So there's kind of full spectrum digestive enzymes that take care of what the pancreas normally produces to
Yes.
finish that digestion when it gets into the food gets into the small intestine, but then it
Mhm.
might have some of the ox bile and the betaine
Mhm.
hydrochloride in it too.
Yes, yes. So when somebody's going to use vinegar, apple cider vinegar to help acidify, talk me through a little bit about how do you tell them to do that? What is the protocol for that?
Well, and that I think it's individual too, with how
Mhm.
much somebody might need. I think there is a gentle, because sometimes people want to know, well, how do I know if I have low stomach acid?
Yeah.
You can actually mix a quarter teaspoon of baking soda in 4 ounces of cold water, drink it on an empty stomach, and see how long it takes you to burp. And if it takes more than 3 to 5 minutes, you probably have lower stomach acid.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's an
A
easier
little
one. There's
test.
really no real easy or
Mhm.
true test.
Yeah,
So
there isn't. Other than you can put a probe, you know,
yeah,
you put a probe down your esophagus through your nose, and walk around with it in your stomach for some period of time, which, I mean, that's barbaric as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly, yeah. So
Very rarely is
not
that called
easy.
for.
Yes,
Thankfully. So
yes. I'd rather have the baking soda.
I think that's a really interesting down and dirty way to get at it. That's so cool. I just learned something really fascinating. I'm going to try that. Try
Yeah.
that.
And otherwise, just, like start with a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar in
Mm,
water before
I-
you eat, just a little bit of water, and see how that makes you feel.
Yeah.
You can even increase. Some people have done a tablespoon
Okay.
in water. So again,
Right
more
before you eat.
of a natural, lower potency.
Mhm. Right.
I think
And
with
so
your,
how do
go
you
ahead.
know whether you need digestive enzymes or not? I get that question a lot. Like people have indigestion, so they
Yeah.
go and buy a digestive enzyme, and they're not really sure if that's what they're supposed to be doing or if they really need that. How do you arrive at that diagnosis?
So again, I like to oftentimes start with foundation. So like
Yeah,
how fast? If they're eating really fast, we start there. Let's
yeah,
just slow down and
mhm,
see how you're feeling and what you're noticing.
yeah,
And if like, gosh, everything is so much better, then cool, let's just stay right there. Otherwise, like you mentioned the stool testing. So to really assess all aspects of digestive health, we can find out that way if they need the support. Otherwise, if they're still having that indigestion, like more a couple hours after they eat, they're noticing undigested food in their stool, probably could use some support. And I don't think there's any harm done to support digestive enzymes with meals if
yeah,
even if they didn't really need it. It's not going to hurt them. So that they could do just a full spectrum digestive, like vegetarian digestive enzyme that has like
mhm,
your amylase and your peptase and your lipase.
yeah,
And you just take that like one capsule before a meal,
right.
especially like a protein containing meal if you're going to do the betaine hydrochloric acid.
And it's probably good to maybe get some help on picking one because I have had people just go to a traditional store, big box store and buy a digestive enzyme, but it's really low potency and it's probably not very good quality and they don't get relief. And then they think, oh, I just don't, this isn't the right thing for me. When truly they probably just need something more potent or more broad spectrum or with betaine, without, like they really need that nuance of working with somebody who understands how to look at that.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
just like quality of food, we've talked about the quality of food, like getting back to whole foods versus all these processed refined foods.
Right.
Same thing with supplements.
Right.
You do want to have a pharmaceutical grade supplement because exactly it's going to be more effective, it's going to be safer, it's not going to have a lot of additives and junk added to it. So that is important.
And we don't want to take digestive enzymes so that we can continue on with the Doritos. I mean, I do,
Love
but
that.
we want to make
Yes,
the, we want to solve the problem
yes.
as we're transitioning into a more healthy diet, that maybe some people are on that journey and they're trying to figure out how do I move from this diet of convenience that I've lived on for a really long time into one that's more healthy and that supports my gut. And that doesn't happen in 24 hours. And so sometimes the digestive enzymes are that bridge, they're helping people move over, but hopefully they're not something that they have to take forever.
Correct.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And
Yeah.
especially if there is betaine hydrochloric chloride in it, those are not long term.
Right. Right.
Your
Yeah.
body kind of gets its own little reset with
Yes.
that. And so it's not a long-term thing for that. It's just like PPIs, just like proton pump inhibitors. They're not supposed to be long-term, but they are.
But they are because they're designed to do that to you, unfortunately, get you on that roller coaster and keep you on that roller coaster.
Yes.
There are great protocols, by the way, if anybody's listening to this and is on a proton pump inhibitor and has struggled to get off of it, because it is hard because every time you stop it, those little acid wells just burst forward and the acid return of acid is just intense. And people are like, oh my God, I guess I need to continue to take this. And then it becomes this, vicious cycle. There are ways that you can work with a functional medicine doctor, nutritionist to get you off of proton pump inhibitors forever. Done it many times. I know you have, Cindi, and it's very effective. And people are relieved because they think they're going to have to take them for the rest of their lives. And there are some people, obviously, that it is important. They've had recurrent ulcers, or they have another, they have Barrett's esophagus, a cancerous condition. There are some truly medical conditions that require acid suppression therapy, but not as many of those as we see people using those medications. So,
Yeah.
So yeah, upper GI tract. Okay, we talked about the small intestine. This is my small intestine. Ants.
It's 25 feet long. So yeah, keep going, keep
Let's
going.
keep going and going and going. So small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, a topic in and of itself, but we kind of hit on that. That's something that's really important and is something that should be investigated when somebody has chronic constipation. Oftentimes an underlying cause, oftentimes a consequence of constipation. So it's worth, evaluating and learning whether that's the case for you. But then now let's get down to the colon. So we've gone through all the small intestine. And I think when people think about chronic constipation or constipation in general, whether it's chronic or not, they tend to think about the colon because that's kind of the part of the body that feels constipated,
Yeah.
right? That's like where the constipation is happening.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit. You alluded to earlier about the microbiome,
Yeah.
our normal bacterial flora, which isn't just in the colon, obviously, it's many places in our body. But talk a little bit about the microbiome, its role in constipation. Maybe talk about probiotics, your use of probiotics. How do you approach that in somebody who has constipation?
Yeah. So the microbiome, as we mentioned, it's very metabolically active, and we want to have a balance. You're going to have some very healthy bacteria. You're going to have some not so healthy bacteria. I think, there's well over 1,000 different strains of bacteria identified. Each one of us probably have somewhere between 140 to 160 at one time. So it's like our literal fingerprint. Nobody
Right.
has the same microbiome, but even like our microbiome today is going to be different tomorrow. It's constantly evolving and changing. So when we think about that, we have to remember we have to diversify our diet. So we're not toddlers. We're oftentimes, who we're addressing and working with our adults. So we need to get out of the food jags. So we don't want to be eating the same food every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We gotta change it up. And especially when we're talking plants, like those whole food plants. That is what the microbiome loves. That's how we're going to feed it, right? That's the fertilizer. That's what's going to feed our garden is those prebiotic fibers that are coming from our plants. And then probiotics. So you can move the needle more by incorporating probiotic foods. So that's anything fermented. So if you're thinking about fermented vegetables, things like pickles and sauerkraut and kimchi, and there's a lot of other vegetables that are pickled these days, or fermented, I should say, versus pickled. You really want to get the ones that are in the refrigerator because those are going to be true fermented vegetables versus there are some that are sitting on a shelf. Those are not necessarily going to be the same fermentation. Also, if you can tolerate dairy, things like kefir, which is basically a yogurt drink or yogurt, that works. And you just want to make sure to get plain because if you get any type of flavor, even vanilla, you're adding a lot of sugar. And
Right.
sugar is just going to kill off those bacteria.
Yep.
So we want to feed the bacteria. You can also do things like non-GMO organic tempeh or miso. All of those things are
I
really
forget about that. Yeah, that's true. That is a fermented product.
or natto if you can do that. That's a very unique taste, I think, for a lot of folks. So that's like my first place is like using food as medicine. Like how can we help? You can also do supplements. So there's a lot of probiotic supplements. I encourage doing a multi-strain, so a variety of strains, and don't do the same one. Just like we're not going to eat the same thing every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Switch up the probiotic.
Yep.
Because again, we have so many different strains of bacteria in our gut. We want to be able to nurture.
Yep. That's so true. That's so true. So for the people out there who aren't huge fans of fermented foods, like really not fans. And so I get the question a lot, like, should I take a probiotic? Should I just take a probiotic as part of my regular routine supplement regimen, alongside my vitamin D and the other things that pretty much every human should be taking that especially lives this far north? What's your opinion?
I am a big advocate of probiotics, and especially if somebody can't or won't do a lot of the fermented foods, then yes, we definitely want to be able to support it with a supplement.
Yeah. And I like your idea of changing it up. That's something that is also kind of new to me. I tend to be, I sort of, I guess I do the preschool, version of supplements in terms of in terms of microbiome and that kind of thing, because I feel like you buy one, you're like, okay, I like this one. It's, easy for me, whatever. And then you stay on the same one forever. But the idea of changing it around it's a great idea, actually. I hadn't
And
thought.
one thing that, since we've talked about SIBO, I don't know if you've heard of this in with your clientele, but I know one classic sign of SIBO is intolerance of probiotic supplements.
Intolerance, how?
Because a lot of them have lactobacilli and streptococcus, which are your
Yes.
predominant strains in the small intestine. So you're
Yeah.
actually feeding the bacteria in the small intestine with probiotics.
Yeah.
So that's one of the classic differentiators
That's
that
really
I
interesting.
see a lot with
Yeah,
SIBO.
because I have heard that from patients where they're like, I took a probiotic and I didn't feel good.
Yeah.
So that's
Yep.
interesting.
So then we have to start thinking, what else is going on in my
Do you
intestinal tract?
recommend probiotic use in patients who have SIBO or who are being treated for SIBO?
I tend to go with more of the spore-based
Spore-based. Okay.
when they're doing that, because that's really healing for the intestinal tract, but it's not going to stimulate the growth of those bacteria. It's not going to feed them.
All this nuance. This is so good. This is so helpful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then stay on spore-based for some period of time after that, or switch back to like a more traditional probiotic.
If you're talking about with SIBO, I would say like once their symptoms are starting to calm down, you could
Yeah.
try going off and going on to one of the more standard probiotics and see how you do.
Yeah.
As long as the motility is really going, especially if we're talking about the methano type, the methane-based bacterial overgrowth, if their motility is working, they're moving, they don't have the same type of bloating and gas, then yeah, I think we're ready. We're ready to try
Absolutely.
some of the others.
Absolutely. Do you have, so kind of as a final thing to think about?
Yeah.
I know that there are people who, and I have quite a few of these patients in my practice, and you probably do as well, who even as infants, way, way, way back from the very beginning of time in someone's lives, had motility problems, had chronic constipation, had constipation as a child. The entire family had constipation. Mom had it. There's clearly sort of like this almost familial low motility problem. And I've always kind of thought of that as more of maybe some sort of neuromuscular condition that we don't really understand very well. We don't really understand like the nerves of the colon and how those nerves fire, and could there be some sort of genetic predisposition to low firing of those nerves as people move through those. Have you ever had a constipation patient that you couldn't help somehow get
That's a
better?
great question.
Yeah.
I think I don't know that I could say that there's somebody that has not had any relief,
Yeah.
because there, as you mentioned, I mean, there's so many reasons why they could be constipated.
Yeah.
And so that's even taking it to a deeper level. But I would say most everyone has improved.
Yes.
But I would say too, like the folks that haven't gotten quite back to the daily, like what we talked about, what classifies as constipation, what do we really want to be doing, still kind of comes back to what they're doing or not doing
Right.
within their diet and lifestyle. So I don't know that I could say that there was necessarily someone that I'm like, gosh, why?
Yeah.
Why is that not? Because there's so many reasons, but that's why it's so important to work as a team. And so with our clientele who we're talking with, is like it's so important to have your team of your functional medicine practitioner and then a functional nutritionist
Yes.
to help you
Yes.
peel away the layers and get to that root.
Yeah.
Because we shouldn't have to work this hard. We shouldn't have to scratch our head and be like, what is going on? There's something, right? There's something
Yes.
surface.
Yeah.
I think, one of the things that I find, especially since the pandemic, is more of the autonomic nervous system and the vagus nerve involvement.
Ooh, okay. Sorry, we got to go there. Say more.
We have
Yes.
to. It's like, it has just gotten tapped on. I mean, are you seeing this?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Absolutely. Yes.
So when what we're talking about, you guys are probably like, what? Why are you speaking
They've
right
gone
now?
off on a tangent. This happens with
They've
Cindi.
got their own language going.
Yeah. So talk about what is the vagus nerve? Like what when you're talking about that autonomic nervous system, what is all that?
Yeah. So we've heard of the gut brain connection,
Right.
right? And so if the gut's not functioning well, brain's not going to be functioning well. If our brain's not functioning well, our gut's not going to be functioning well. They are super connected, and that's through the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is like the longest cranial nerve in our body. It's a wandering nerve. It's connecting the brain to a lot of organs, including the GI tract. So in this case, the autonomic nervous system takes on the sympathetic and the parasympathetic arms of the nervous system. So if we think about life and all of our stressors, we're constantly triggering the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight. And so whenever we're activating fight or flight, whether we need to or not, we're shutting down motility. We're shutting down our gut because we can't put the reserves and our energy there. We need to be able to run. We need to be able to fight, even though whatever our stressor is doesn't require that. And so we're suppressing that parasympathetic. The parasympathetic is your rest and digest. That's kind of like the brake of the body, whereas the sympathetic is your accelerator. So our life and what's happening beneath the surface is often hitting that accelerator. And we have to intentionally and purposefully hit the brake. We have to activate that on our own. And so one of those things is that mindful eating practice that we talked about.
Totally. Yeah.
That's huge in regards to allowing the gut to relax and be able to digest. We just got to slow down, be intentional and purposeful around our meals. But you can also stimulate the vagus nerve. The vagus is what's interesting. So I've worked with a lot of people about this, and it's fascinating to me in regards to how do we activate the vagus nerve.
Yeah.
The vagus, it also attaches to the vocal cord. And so by singing, by chanting, by humming loudly, you can activate the vagus nerve and allow the parasympathetic to take on, and you can rest and digest. Cold therapy, cold immersions. I know you don't like this one, Tiff. Is that where you taking a cold shower or you do a cold plunge, even to put, cold water on your face or on your neck, can activate the vagus nerve. So it's super interesting in regards to how do we stimulate that rest and digest.
I love the idea of like singing or humming very loudly, because I could get into that. I could definitely get into that. I can't get into the cold plunge, but I'm working my way up. I may put some cold water on my face. I'll try it.
You gotta dip your toes before you plunge.
We'll see if I'll
literally like just dip your feet or
we'll
your
see. Yes. But I think the cool thing about the vagus nerve is we tend to, the brain is like the president, right? And we tend to think about the brain as sort of being top down, like everything, the brain just goes one way, but what we understand about the vagus and about probably all of the nervous system is it's a two-way street. So there's a brain gut, emotions affecting motility, affecting digestion, but there's also digestion, and you kind of said this, but digestion affecting our minds and how our minds are working. And when we're feeling foggy, for example, it may be that our gut is causing that, or even some of the output of the microbiome we now understand can have some impact on that as well. So it's an absolutely fascinating idea that
psychobiotics,
yes,
the field that's coming out, like certain bacteria that are affecting our mental health.
Yes. And I think what we forget about is there's more of them from a cell count basis than there are of us. So like, who's in charge here?
Yes. We're
Yeah.
talking about this topic, right?
Right. So I don't think we can underscore how important the gut health piece is, not just to the gut, but to the whole body and the mind and mood and hormones and energy levels and, you name it. There really isn't, everything's connected, but the gut, in functional medicine, we always joke like the gut is the epicenter of the universe, but it really is. And so working with your practitioner to solve constipation, solve motility issues, get rid of SIBO when it's there, manage a healthy microbiome, healthy, stomach acid levels. Really important stuff.
Absolutely. I think the one that we didn't touch on was food sensitivities.
Oh, right. How did we forget?
Especially when we start talking about the brain, because we've got receptors in the brain that are like opioid-like.
Yes.
creates this addictive properties. Like gluten and cow dairy are two of the most common food sensitivities, meaning they're creating inflammation in our
Absolutely.
body, and it's affecting our gut function and also our brain, because
Yes.
and that's why it's so hard to get off of it. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't break up with that. Well, right there, that's telling us there's a problem, because that means your receptors in your brain are turned on.
Yes.
It is a problem for your body.
That's really fascinating to think that gluten and dairy could be addictive. We
Yeah.
know sugar is. We know sugar is for sure.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So yeah, food sensitivity is like a whole other barrel of monkeys, but we can, that's testing that's totally appropriate. Figure it out. Like not everybody has sensitivities to all of these things. Gluten and dairy are super common, eggs are very common, but not everybody has them. And so to be able to work through like diagnosing that, doing an elimination diet, allowing the gut to heal, supporting the gut so that the gut can become the barrier of the gut can become intact again, which the microbiome definitely participates in that construction process. And oh yeah, the food sensitivities piece is huge in that. So
I
pretty
think it's
much
just
everybody should be testing
experimentation.
that. Yeah.
Huh?
I said everyone should know that profile about themselves.
Yeah.
I think.
So whether you do the experiment about changing things up
Yeah.
in how you're eating, what you're eating, or you do the testing, you know,
Mhm.
both are super important. And
Yes.
so it just depends on where you're at. It's like, hey, I just want to know now. Let's do the
Yep.
testing.
Yep.
Otherwise, hey, I'm going to take a little bit of time to explore and see how food is serving my body and my digestive
Yes.
tract.
Yeah.
So we can take a couple different avenues.
Right. Right. Yeah. That just depends on how good you are at tuning into your body and your body's responses to things. And
Yeah.
also knowing that people who have slow motility may not have an immediate set of symptoms that arise from a food sensitivity. They may have a delayed, response within 48, 72 hours. So you do have to become pretty Sherlock Holmes or Nancy Drew, or you have to really become quite a sleuth at figuring it out and, tracking. There's all kinds of great apps in that area, but just tracking, the way that foods, hit you and how things feel. And when you become more energetic and when you become less energetic, can really be helpful, can really say a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a really fun discussion. I love talking about the gut, but I got to say, I really love talking about the gut with you. I always learn new things. It's absolutely amazing. I've been at this for a long time and I think I got all my tricks. And then I'm like, wait, Cindy's got like 3 more things that I never heard of before. So
The same back at you too. I mean, and that's why
thank
it
you.
takes a team. We need to learn from each other. And that's what's exciting. And I think every day I'm learning.
Yes.
I don't think we've stopped learning. Just like you
No, that's
learned
true.
about the PPIs. And I even learn from my clients every
Mhm.
single day.
Oh, definitely. Me too. Yeah. Well,
So
thank you for all your wisdom. Takeaways, fiber, water. We can't say enough about food. I know Cindy is a nutritionist and that's her world, but food is really the issue here in most cases. And a large percentage of folks can feel a lot better with respect to their constipation, just really making some simple, long-standing, life-changing
and
different
slowing down
and
and
slowing down.
slowing down. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that is so true. Especially now that we're working from home and we're eating and working, that's probably never been higher than it is now, right? So yeah,
Correct.
I'm guilty of that. I should probably work on that too.
Who isn't?
Right.
We all get into those habits.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Cindy. Really appreciate your wisdom as always. Look
Thank
forward to the next time we talk and have a good rest of your summer.
you. You too.